Let's take just a minute. And I'm getting ready to ask you to ask someone a couple of different and unusual questions. And so before we do that, I just want you to turn to the person next to you and introduce yourself. Make sure you know them. Go ahead and do that. Just say, hi, my name is. Go ahead and take your liberty to do that.
Hey, how's it going? Nice to meet you. Sorry.
Look at them and ask this question. Do you believe in heaven?
Yes.
Okay. Here's the weird one. Do you believe in hell? Ask that question.
Yeah.
I guaranteed somebody just said hell, yes. Because I know you guys, right? Okay, so those are questions that are a little difficult to ask someone that you don't know, right? Heaven and hell. So my question, do you believe in heaven? Yeah? I mean, how about hell? Do you believe in hell?
Yes.
Okay. So hold on to those questions. I'll tell you why I want you to address that in just a second. So this is a guy named Penn Jillette. Anybody know who Penn and Teller, right? Okay, all right. So I'm reading his book. He wrote a book called God, No. Signs You May Already Be an Atheist and Other Magical Tales. Now, I'm not an atheist, but I'm interested in how atheists think, right? So I read and I listen to atheists because I have a good number of friends who, in fact, are atheists or agnostics. So I'm interested in how they think. A bit ago, Penn posted a video online, and it's going to be on our Facebook page today, facebook.com/mychurch180. And he posted this video in which he talked about, he said, we did a show, and after the show, some guy came up to him and said something like this. He said, I brought something for you. And he handed Penn, who is a wide-open atheist, he handed him a Bible, a small Bible, New Testament, right? And he said, I wrote in the front of it, and I want you to have it. He said, look, I'm a businessman. I'm not crazy. I'm not one of the lunatics. I just wanted to give this to you. And so Penn, in reflecting on this act, later he sat down and made this video, and he said, this guy was kind, and he was nice, and he was sane, and he looked me in the eyes, and he talked to me, and he gave me this Bible. And then he said this, and this is what I really want you to catch. I don't respect people who don't proselytize. Now, you know what proselytize means? It basically means I'm trying to get you to believe what I believe. Right? I'm trying to get you to buy into, and it's often used in the religious environment. So Penn is essentially saying, I don't respect Christians who don't try to get other people to believe what they believe. Let me continue. He said, if you believe there's a heaven and a hell, remember, this is a wide-open atheist. He wrote this book in which he is making the case for atheism, right? He says, if you believe there's a heaven and a hell, and people could be going to hell or not getting eternal life or whatever, and you think it's really not worth telling them this because it would make it socially awkward, how much do you have to hate somebody to not proselytize? How much do you have to hate someone to believe everlasting life is possible and not tell them that? In other words, he says, listen, if you really believe in heaven and you really believe in hell and you don't want to tell someone that because you feel like it's going to be socially awkward, how much do you hate those people? He went on and he said, if I believed beyond the shadow of a doubt that a truck was coming at you and you didn't believe it, and that truck is bearing down on you, there's a certain point at which I tackle you, right? And this is more important than that. Penn Teller. I really encourage you to go online and watch that video. Interesting video. And so we go back to this question. Do you believe in heaven? Right? Do you believe in hell? Now, we don't talk a lot about that, and I think we're probably going to tackle that here shortly. But if you believe that there is a place called heaven, which is really good, and there's a place called hell, which is really bad, what are you doing with that? Particularly with the people in your sphere of influence who don't know about it, who don't think about it, who haven't moved towards Jesus. Like, what do you do with it? And so we're gonna spend this month talking about how to share your faith. Now, we've named this series "How to Save a Life," and because we believe three things. We're going to build this series on these three premises. Number one, we believe there is a God who wants to save people's lives. Right? Christians across the board, right? Christians at churches all over the world today believe this. There is a God, and He wants to save people's lives. He wants to engage in people's lives and save them from the results of their sins here in this world, and He wants to save them from hell and take them to heaven. Christians believe that. Number two, we believe that God primarily uses people to save other people's lives. So, sometimes God will use an event to save people's lives, right? Like, you are in a plane and the plane almost crashes and you're like, wow, that was close. I better get things right with God, all right? That's an event. But we believe that God uses people more often than not to save other people's lives, okay? Number three, we believe that the best lifesavers are people who know God. Right? So the people who are most likely to help someone find God are people who already know God. Let me explain it like this. It's not terribly uncommon to hear about someone whose life was saved. For instance, they're choking and there happens to be someone there. Maybe it's a school teacher. It's a math teacher, and this individual's choking, and the math teacher runs over and applies the Heimlich maneuver, and they spit out that piece of candy, right? They saved their life. But if you knew that you were going to be choking later today, we're at 180 Olympics, you're eating hot dogs, and a piece of that hot dog gets stuck in your throat, would you, if you knew that right now, would you rather have a math teacher or a doctor available to you when you're choking? Tell me. Of course, you'd rather have a math teacher. I'm kidding. You'd rather have a doctor, right? Because doctors do that. That's what they do. They save lives. So if I know I'm going to be choking, I would rather have a doctor available to me. I'm glad the math teacher's there, but if I get to choose, I choose a doctor. And see, that's what Christians do. We are trained and we are given the responsibility of saving lives. Now, sometimes there are situations in which an unbeliever can help to lead someone to Christ. Like, for instance, if you're in war and you're in Afghanistan and ISIS is shooting at you and you're ducking and you say, "Good God, I know if I die, I'm not going to be in a good place, so I better do something." And you have this prayer, and ISIS's bullets help to lead you to this decision to get right with God, right? So in that instance, God used a bad person to help you get right with God. That does happen sometimes, but more often than not, people who know God are most likely to help people who don't know God know Him. Does that make sense? Does that make sense? Yeah. Okay, good. All right. Now, we believe that God, if you're a Christian, if you know God, the Bible teaches that we have this responsibility to help other people come to know God. We're the ones that God will use to help other people know God. And we believe this because Jesus said something to His followers once that is incredibly instructive. And what I want to do is I want to use this verse over the next couple of weeks. And this verse comes from the Message. Does anyone know what the Message is? Usually when I teach on Sunday mornings, I'll teach from the New Living Translation. But this series, I want to take some liberty and use the Message. I love what it does with what Jesus says. So look at this. This is what Jesus says. Let me tell you why you're here. This is a big deal, right? When Jesus looks at you and says, "Let me tell you why you're here," we ought to listen. This is what He says. You are here to be the salt seasoning that brings out the God flavors of this earth. All right, so this is from Matthew chapter 5. Jesus says, you're here as salt to bring out the God flavors of this earth. So have you ever, you've been sitting and you've been eating a meal and you're like, man, this is just missing something. And then it occurs to you it needs some salt. So you put some salt on it. Like, man, that would really help to make this meal a little better. You ever have that happen? Right? And so Jesus in his teaching in Matthew chapter 5 essentially says this, listen, you have been placed here because there's some God things in this world that unbelievers and people who do not know God can never experience unless you engage. So let me just put it like this. You have neighbors, and you have people that you work with, and you have friends, and you have family, and there's some God things in their life that they're never going to experience unless you engage. Jesus said, this is why you're here. You're here to be like salt. You make it better. He said, look, if you lose your saltiness, which, by the way, as a father of middle school and now 2 high school girls, salty means something different than what Jesus meant. Does anybody else have that right? If I say to you, you're being salty, that's not a good thing. Jesus didn't mean it like salty means like you're being mean, you're being a jerk, you're being unkind. Jesus didn't mean it like that. So when he says if you lose your saltiness, because sometimes I'll say to my girls, you need to quit being so doggone salty. That's not, Jesus isn't saying that. He's saying, in this instance, salt actually makes things better, right? All right, so that we're clear. If you lose your saltiness, how will people taste godliness? If you're a Christian and you're not making things better, if you're not making the room better, if you're not making relationships, if you're not being Christ-like, how will people taste God? He says you've lost your usefulness and you'll end up in the garbage. Here's another way to put it. You're here to be light, bringing out the God colors in the world. In other words, there's some things about God that people will never see unless you engage. There's some God things in this world. There's some things that God wants to do that unbelievers will never be able to participate in unless you show up. And then he said this, God is not a secret to be kept. We're going public with this, as public as a city on a hill. Charlotte, you guys ever round the bend at nighttime and see Charlotte? It just explodes out of the ground. It's so obnoxiously obvious. You can't miss Charlotte at nighttime, can you? Right? And Jesus said, he said, look, if you are a follower of mine, if you're a Christian, this is what you are. You're meant to shine. You're meant to be obvious, not obnoxious, but you're meant to be obvious, like a city on a hill. We don't hide the God thing. He said, if I make you light bearers, you don't think I'm going to hide you under a bucket, do you? I'm putting you on a light stand. I want you to bring light wherever you go. Now that I've put you there on a hilltop, on a light stand, here's what I want you to do. Say it with me. Shine. This is why you're here. You're not here to connect to God and do it quietly, alone, by yourself. That needs to happen. But when that happens, then you need to go out and shine. Keep open house. Be generous with your lives. And here's the kicker. By opening up to others, you'll prompt people to open up with God, this generous Father in heaven. As you live your life in front of people, this God life, as you are salt, making things better, and you are light, people are going to be engaging with God in ways they would not ever have done had you not been engaged. Now, as I read through this, something pretty quickly pops out. This idea, this lesson, is the first thing I want us as a church to really get our hands around when it comes to saving a life. Here's what it is. Lesson number 1. Christians make things better and light things up. That's what we do. Christians make things better and light things up. See, salt makes bland things, it makes boring things come alive. Light keeps you from stumbling around in a dark room. Listen, let me just tell you, there's lots of people in your sphere of influence, right? There's lots of people in your family, your friends, the people with whom you work. They're living boring, bland, uneventful, purposeless lives. And Jesus steps up and says, let me tell you, if you're a believer in this room, all right, if you believe in Jesus Christ, Jesus says, let me tell you why you're here. You're the salt. You're the one who's going to step into their lives and introduce them to something that gives love and joy and peace and purpose and passion. And it takes the boring and brings life into it. That's why you're here. God has put you in these people's lives to be salt. And then you have people in your lives and they're stumbling around. You know, listen, I love my wife, but I can't stand when she moves our living room around. And there's a reason. I get up early in the morning before the sun comes up, right? And I can make my way to the coffee pot with my eyes closed. I know exactly where I'm going with my eyes closed until she moves the room around. And then toes are stubbed, bad words are said, hard feelings are generated. All that stuff happens because there's no light. So when that happens, what I need to do is I need to grab my cell phone and help that light, and it keeps me from stumbling and falling. And you've got people in your life right now who are stumbling and falling, and their life is falling apart. And Jesus says to you as his follower, let me tell you why you're here. You're here to be salt. You're here to be light. Your light could change their life. Your life could change their life. Salt makes things better. Light lights things up, and that's what we do. So evaluation time, you ready? Are you a follower of Jesus? Have you don't need to say this out loud, I just want you to think in your head. Have you at some point in your life said, I believe in Jesus Christ. I am going to follow his teachings. I trust in him. I'm going to line up behind him. Have you made that commitment? Number one. Number two, do people know that you're a Christian? And listen, I'm not talking about know you're a Christian because you have a bumper sticker on your car or you wear some goofy Christian t-shirt, right? I'm not talking about that, right? Do they know you're a Christian? And let me get even more closer to home, right? Do people like when you're around? See, I know some people, some Christians and some people who aren't Christians, that as soon as they begin to enter into a conversation, you're like, oh gosh, it's downhill from here, right? You know those kind of people? It's just going to be like they're not salt, they're like turmeric, right? It's just like, right? They're not light, they're like a bucket of mud, right? You're having this great conversation, they just dump on it, right? So the question, are you a follower of Jesus? Do people know that? And then the third thing is, do they like when you're around? When you walk into the room, are people like, oh, good, Paul's here. Yeah, good, that makes me happy. That means we're going to have some fun, that the conversation's going to get better. Maybe we'll learn something, right? I mean, we're going to have a good time because he's here or she's here or whomever, right? Do they like when you're around? Because Jesus said as Christians, this is what we do. We are the light of the world. We are the salt. Now, Jesus, we just read this, he said to his followers, he said, you, if you believe in me, if you're a Christian, you are the light of the world. Now, interestingly, in another conversation Jesus was having, in John chapter 5, he said this. John chapter 8, he said this. Jesus, I am the light of the world. If you follow me, you won't have to walk in darkness because you will have the light that leads to life. Like, I'm the light of the world. And if you read through the Gospels, you know what you'll see is you'll see that sinners like Jesus, people who didn't believe, people whose lives were all jacked up, people who were living dysfunctionally, people who, like a lot of the religious leaders of the day, in fact, when they looked at Jesus, they're like, why do you hang out with those people, right? And Jesus said, because I came for these people. Let me just tell you something. If you don't have the number of unbelievers in your cell phone, if you're not in regular contact with people who don't know God, you might ought to have a serious conversation with Jesus about why you're here. Jesus said, I put you here so that you could be a part of their lives, so that you could be salt and light in their lives. Right? Now, Jesus said, I'm the light of the world in this verse. And then later he said, you're the light of the world. In other words, I want you to be like me when I'm not physically there. And let me just tell you something. When Jesus showed up, do you know what happened when Jesus showed up? When he walked into a room that was empty, what happened?
Filled up.
The room filled up. In fact, if you read through the Gospels, you'll often see this. Wherever Jesus went, huge crowds began to gather. Why? Because people liked Jesus. Because wherever he went, he made things better and he lit things up. Things were better when Jesus walked in the room. And now he looks at us as his followers. He said, look, I'm the light of the world, but I'm not there in my body right now. So you're going to need to do what I used to do, and that is make things better and light things up. You may have heard this, but Mahatma Gandhi, commonly known as Gandhi, once said this. He said, he was speaking to a Christian. He said, I like your Christ. I do not like your Christians. Your Christians are so unlike your Christ. Oh, have you heard that? This ought not to be, right? So what do we do about that? Jesus said, this is why you're here. You're here to be salt in this world. You're here to make things better. You're here to light things up. So if we have this reputation of not doing that well, how do we go about changing that and actually accomplishing that thing Jesus sent us here to do? Well, the first is, let me just tell you this. Let's understand what evangelism is not, okay? When I say evangelism, most of us get a little nervous, right? I mean, I do. When people say, I want to talk to you about evangelism, I get a little nervous. So yesterday, I was at Aldi's with Mrs. Peterson, and as I want to do, I went to the bathroom. And when I was done, I went to dry my hands, and I saw this. Now, some of you may not be able to see that, so look at this. It's a tract. A tract that told me how to find Jesus. In the bathroom at Aldi's. You know what that's called? Littering. Right? Some good soul, someone who meant well, left that there. Right? And I hope it was no one in this room, lest I hurt your feelings. But let me just tell you something. That's not evangelism. In fact, that's actually potentially annoying because some employee has to go in there and clean the bathroom. And you know what they've got to do with that? They've got to clean it up. When I see stuff like that, I appreciate the effort that's being made there, but that is not evangelism. That's not salt. That's not light. That's not what Jesus did. That's hit and run. Right? So let me just tell you something. When we talk about evangelism, I'm not talking about dropping tracts in bathrooms. That's unsanitary, not to mention a number of other things. Okay? So we're not talking about that. When we talk about evangelism, we're not talking about dropping tracts. We're not talking about knocking on the door of a stranger's house and saying something like this. If you were to die tonight, do you know where you would go? Have you heard of that?
Yes.
It was actually an evangelism method that was used for a long time, and God, in His mercy, used it, and He was very kind and gracious. But let me just tell you something. If you knock on my door and you ask me that question, I'm probably going to call the cops, right? So when I talk about evangelism, we're not talking about that. Quite frankly, I don't even think Jesus was talking about that as you look at His method, right? Let me tell you something else evangelism is not. You see that? That is painted with the gospel, right? Now, listen, I might be getting in trouble with some of you guys. I hope not. But here's the truth. When you paint your truck and you put and you write, Jesus is coming, are you ready, in the dust on your back rear window, right? Have you seen that? I don't think that counts as evangelism. You know what that does? That stuff shows up on Instagram. That stuff, when you do that kind of stuff, I don't know, but it seems to me like that is a Hail Mary, let's give it whatever we got, and it's not, I don't think that Jesus had this stuff in mind when He talked about how to share our faith. Evangelism, listen, evangelism is not weird, it's not awkward, it's natural. Evangelism is you being you. Look, evangelism is this, making things better and lighting things up. This is what Christians do. Jesus comes into our lives. We trust him, we believe in him, we begin to follow his teaching, he begins to change our lives, our attitudes begin to change, our relationships begin to change, we begin to make things better, we begin to light things up, and people begin to ask us questions like, hey man, you've been acting differently lately. How are you doing this? Like, how are you handling all this stuff that's going on? What are you doing that's changing your relationships? How did you not get angry and blow up when everyone else in the room was acting out? How did you handle that? And that is exactly what Jesus is talking about when he's talking about making things better and letting things up. The other day I was at the school function for the kids, met a lady I'd never met. After talking for a while, she looked at me and said, "Are you a pastor?" And immediately I got nervous, right? Because typically I do not want to be, that's not how I want to lead, right? And so I didn't know what to expect. Like, did I come off as, I don't know, stuffy or what? Like, so I said, well, I am actually. And the more we talked, the more I began to feel at ease. But it really came down to, like, you were laughing, there was joy, there was just a different vibe. And listen, I've had plenty of opportunities where when I told people I was a pastor, like, are you kidding me? Right? So, not to boast on myself, but I'm simply saying that's what it begins to look like. When we walk in our room, we make things better, we light things up because of Jesus inside of us. And so, let me just say this. It really is as simple as this. Here's how we light things up. Here's how we make things better. This knowledge of I'm forgiven by God and I'm loved by God. And that gives me confidence. I'm working on my issues with God, with friends, with the church, right? I'm working on my issues. I'm getting better. That makes me happy. And when you have that kind of energy, I promise you walk into a room, you make things better, you light things up. And so here's what I want to do. As we kick off this series, I want you to ask yourself these two questions. Number one, am I a Christian? Have I trusted in Jesus? Am I a Christian? Number two, do I make things better and light things up? When I walk into a room, are people happy to see me? Does my life talk about Jesus? Does my life give people reason to ask questions for my joy? Those are the questions, right? Am I a Christian? Am I making things better and lighting things up? And so next week we're gonna take this a next step. We're gonna take it the next step. We're gonna begin to explore further about how to talk about Jesus. But let me just tell you this: if you're Debbie Downer, if you're negative Ned, whatever the case is, nobody wants to hear about your God. If you're angry, if you're mean, if you're all those things, nobody wants to hear about your God. If you're judgmental, you're hypocritical, etc., etc. Jesus said the first key is this: be salt and light. Make things better. Light things up. All right? So here's what we're going to do. I'm going to pray. And then I'm going to have Jennifer Reed. She's going to come up and close out the service for us. And then we're going to go to Oakwood Acres. And there will be people there. And my prayer is, as we go there, that we will make things better and we will light things up in their world. What do you say? Right? All right, here we go.